Something is happening tonight that Washington did not see coming. In the last few hours, US intelligence caught a pattern of Russian military movements so coordinated, so deliberate, that analysts are calling it the most dangerous shift of the entire war. And here's the part that has officials genuinely alarmed. This wasn't a show of force. This was preparation. Real preparation. While America slept, Russia quietly moved dozens of armored units into position, activated new electronic warfare systems, and pushed the entire front line into a level of tension we have not witnessed in years. And Ukraine? They didn't wait. They struck back, fast, hard, and with a level of precision that stunned even Washington. What you're about to see isn't just another update. This is the moment the entire conflict took a sharp, explosive turn. It began not with explosions on the battlefield, but with a silence in Washington, an uneasy quiet that seems to fall only when something much larger than a headline is about to unfold. In the early hours of the morning, US intelligence satellites picked up a set of coordinated Russian troop mobilizations near 3 critical sectors of the eastern Ukrainian border. These weren't routine drills, nor were they symbolic gestures designed for intimidation. This was movement with purpose, precision, intent. Analysts inside the National Security Council described it as the most synchronized Russian forward positioning since the opening months of the war. Within minutes, secure phone lines between the Pentagon, CIA, and White House lit up like a crisis control board. Senior officials scrambled into situation room briefings, huddling around high-resolution satellite images that captured Russian armor units, electronic warfare vehicles, and long-range artillery being repositioned with eerie speed. Something was shifting, something the US had not anticipated at this scale. As news filtered upward, Washington's sense of calm evaporated. The president was briefed before sunrise, told plainly that Russia appeared to be preparing for a multi-axis offensive, a strategy designed to force Ukraine into splitting its already thin defensive resources. The mood in the room hardened. Every advisor understood what such a move could mean. A new phase of the conflict that might reignite global tensions, disrupt energy markets, test NATO unity, and overturn months of diplomatic progress. The White House communications team drafted the first urgent watch advisory, but even before it could go public, Russian state media released a cryptic statement hinting at a strategic maneuver essential to regional stability. In Washington, this was read not as reassurance, but as a warning cloaked in propaganda. By mid-morning, US strategists were no longer debating if Russia had launched a new offensive. The question had become how far it would go. Intelligence assessments pointed toward a 3-stage plan: electronic disruption, rapid ground advancement, and then a push to destabilize key Ukrainian logistics routes. The Secretary of State began emergency calls with NATO allies, emphasizing that the window for deterrence may already be closing. Meanwhile, the American public waited tensely for official confirmation, turning to live coverage and commentary for clues. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. Washington hadn't felt this level of geopolitical pressure since the early Cold War era. And in the midst of all this tension, one thing became undeniably clear. Russia had made its move, and the world was about to change again. When Russia's new offensive finally revealed itself in full, it came with timing so deliberate it bordered on theatrical. Hours after US intelligence confirmed mobilization, Russian forces launched a sudden wave of long-range missile tests, not striking Ukrainian territory, but positioning themselves in a way that signaled capability, readiness, and psychological intimidation. Then came cyber disruption. Ukrainian government servers flickered offline for several minutes at a time. Railway command systems experienced forced shutdown reboots. Air defense communications reported interference so precise it seemed almost like a rehearsal for something larger. This was Russia's signature, hybrid warfare, calculated to stretch nerves before stretching front lines. Russian armored battalions then surged across forward staging points, not in a straight charge, but in sweeping arcs designed to confuse early Ukrainian assessments. Drone swarms covered their movements. Electronic jamming masked their signatures. Even Western satellites had trouble tracking certain units as Russia unleashed its newest anti-surveillance technology, something US analysts had only seen in fragmentary intelligence report. Moscow's message was unmistakable. They were evolving, adapting, and they wanted the world to see it. Inside Russia, state broadcasters declared that operations were protective in nature and meant to prevent Ukrainian aggression, spinning a narrative that painted Moscow as a reactive rather than aggressive force. But Western intelligence knew better. Russia was probing vulnerabilities, testing Ukraine's ability to respond, testing NATO's willingness to voice support, testing Washington's patience, and strangely, this multi-layered operation did not seem rushed. It felt methodical, almost scientific, as if Russia were laying out a blueprint for the next chapter of the war. The scale of the offensive left American decision-makers grappling with unpredictable variables. Would Russia push into newly contested zones? Would it aim to seize symbolic territory? Or was this offensive meant to ignite political fractures within Europe as winter energy pressure loomed? Washington's greatest concern was that Russia's moves might embolden other hostile actors to take advantage of global distraction. The entire geopolitical chessboard felt as if it were shifting under the world's feet. Ukraine did not hesitate. Within minutes of detecting Russia's coordinated push, Kyiv activated what sources described as a full-spectrum defensive response protocol. Air defense crews raced into underground command blocks, field units deployed counter-battery radar, and drone operators, many of them civilian volunteers trained through wartime emergency programs, launched reconnaissance fleets into the sky. Ukraine was not the same nation it had been in the early months of the war. It was sharper, faster, more technologically adaptive, and far more battle experienced. As Russia's armored units advanced, Ukrainian precision-guided artillery unleashed a volley that stunned even Western observers. Geo-targeted strikes hit Russian logistics trucks, command vehicles, and forward fuel convoys. Dozens of Russian drones were intercepted by Ukraine's newly upgraded anti-drone systems, a mix of NATO support and locally engineered innovation. Ukrainian special forces then executed rapid strike sabotage raids behind Russian staging lines, targeting communication nodes and supply hubs. The message from Ukraine was unmistakable. They were not waiting to be overwhelmed. They were dictating the tempo. One of the most dramatic moments came when Ukraine launched a hypersonic intercept attempt against a Russian long-range missile test. Intelligence sources captured footage of Ukraine's response missile streaking across the night sky, a bright arc cutting through darkness, symbolizing not just retaliation, but resilience. The footage went viral within minutes. It became a rallying symbol, not only for Ukraine, but for nations supporting its defense. By day's end, Ukraine had struck more than a dozen high-value Russian positions, disrupted several advance routes, and forced Russia to shift its offensive alignment. International observers described the operation as one of the most efficient defensive reactions of modern warfare. For Ukraine, this wasn't just survival, it was evolution under fire. And for Washington, it was proof that Ukraine remained determined, capable, and unwilling to relinquish any strategic ground. The United States responded with intensity, matching the gravity of the situation. Washington issued an urgent national security statement within hours, warning that Russia's offensive represented a severe destabilization attempt with potential global repercussions. The president convened an emergency briefing with bipartisan congressional leaders, urging unified support for Ukraine and stressing the importance of preventing Russia from altering the regional balance of power. For once, both sides of Congress spoke in near synchrony. Russia's aggression required decisive response. Pentagon analysts prepared updated risk assessments predicting several possible trajectories, ranging from limited territorial pressure to a broader destabilization campaign aimed at breaking Ukrainian infrastructure. U.S. defense officials considered accelerating delivery of advanced weapon systems, cyber defensive programs, and long-range surveillance capabilities. Meanwhile, Washington's diplomatic network lit up with communications to NATO allies, the EU, and strategic partners across Asia. If Russia believed the world was exhausted by war fatigue, Washington was working overtime to prove otherwise. However, internally, Washington confronted a deep anxiety. How far would Russia push? And should Ukraine's strong retaliation escalate further, how would Moscow respond? There was no room for miscalculation. This wasn't just warfare, it was geopolitics at knife-edge distance. Every move had potential consequences for global supply chains, oil market, international alliances, and even public morale within democratic nations. Washington understood that its response needed not just strength but precision, diplomacy, and clarity. American media networks erupted into wall-to-wall coverage, bringing military analysts, former ambassadors, and geopolitical experts onto primetime broadcasts. Rachel Maddow framed the moment as a defining pivot in modern conflict politics, a dangerous but revealing window into how authoritarian power structures attempt to leverage global instability. As the situation intensified, the world watched with a mixture of fear, fascination, and uncertainty. European capitals monitored developments minute by minute, preparing contingency plans for refugee displacement, cyber threats, and energy disruptions. Asian markets reacted sharply as investors feared geopolitical contagion. Even distant nations voiced concern, recognizing that conflicts of this scale ripple far beyond borders. Ukraine continued reinforcing defensive sectors, while Russia appeared to adjust its offensive posture in response to Ukrainian strikes. This back and forth became a strategic dance, each side testing the other's resilience, resources, and political endurance. Yet beneath the battlefield maneuvers lay a deeper question. How long could this escalation continue before it triggered something irreversible? Washington made clear that it would defend the principles at stake: sovereignty, democracy, territorial integrity, and the security architecture that has shaped the modern world. But Russia, propelled by its geopolitical ambitions, seemed equally committed to reshaping that world on its own terms. In homes across the United States, citizens watched the coverage not with the distant detachment of casual observers, but with genuine concern, because they understood that moments like this define eras. They decide alliances, they reshape nations, they determine futures. The world wasn't just witnessing a military escalation, it was witnessing the struggle between two visions of global order, one grounded in cooperation and stability, the other in force and domination. And as Ukraine responded with fierce determination, Washington stood closely behind, ready for whatever came next.